Hello, hello, and we are live. I'm Bonnie Wagner Stafford from Ingenium Books, and I'm super excited about what we have in store today, because I think it's something that is really, if it's not on the minds of pretty much any indie author or aspiring author, maybe it should be. But joining me today is David Morris. Hi, David.
Hey there, everybody.
David is the former VP and publisher of Zondervan Publishers. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But that's a division of HarperCollins Christian. So, David, how long were you inside the trenches of the publishing industry?
Sure, I've been in publishing for over 25 years. I was at Zondervan, which is part of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, the faith sector, the faith division of HarperCollins for 7 years, and I was at Guidepost magazine the 17 years prior to that, a little inspirational magazine that has a circulation of 2 or 3 million across the country, and I worked for
just a little one.
Yeah. It was pretty. It's still a very popular magazine, one of the highest renewal rates, and that was a direct mail book business. So we used the names generated by the the subscriptions to then introduce books mostly to those customers, and it was a really really good high volume but narrow publishing program.
Yeah, well, I frequently talk about the dramatic changes in the publishing industry since about 2008. So what you have seen in terms of changes to the publishing industry, must have a greater change trajectory. What would you say would be, one or two of the biggest changes that you saw in the industry in the time that you were there?
Sure. Obviously, it's the digital revolution that has reshaped everything, from retail distribution to how publishing happens, how books get created, to marketing the books. I think probably the toughest change in all of that has been what's gone on with retail stores. So who goes to a shopping mall anymore like they used to? And remember B. Dalton or Walden Books?
Yeah.
Those were some pretty cool chains way back in the day where you could just wander in while you were out looking for jeans or something for Christmas. And those just aren't there anymore. So that has cut down on the ability for people to browse and go into a bookstore and find a book that they may not have been planning on buying, or going and planning on buying a book but picking up other books or learning about authors that are out there. Bookstores used to be, for publishers, a marketing mechanism, a marketing tool. If we could partner with the bookstores, we could get the books in the stores, and they would help sell the books and help create access to consumers, to book buyers, to readers. And now publishers have had to find other ways of doing that. I think that's probably just the changes to the bookstore retail environment. I'm in the faith area, and what we've called Christian bookstores have gone from about 8,000 to about 2,000 in a matter of 10 years, and the volume in those stores is just very, very slim. And that was a big part for that audience, a big marketing tool for those publishers, and so that's created a lot of change.
And there still is a holdover, and maybe holdover is the wrong word, but in the indie author space, there still is, people think it's the holy grail kind of to get the book into a brick and mortar bookstore, that that really is the thing, that if I can say that I've got my book on the bookshelves of whatever store it is, that is going to be the thing that's going to either propel my sales over the top, or that's going to whatever it is. And I think, and maybe I'll ask if you agree, if that is kind of a holdover from those days when that was kind of the main marketing tool for selling books, and it kind of doesn't consider the power that exists now in the digital marketplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course it does. And I think, certainly it's it's not everything to have your book in a bookstore. I mean, especially during this pandemic time, I've ordered a ton of books. I've had more time to do some reading lately,
Right.
and I'm not alone in that. And I've had, my wife's getting tired of that truck that keeps pulling up to our front door and the dog bark
Yeah.
when the book arrives. And then I got to figure out what to do with the plastic that it came in. But the other thing too is just think about publicity. It used to be, speaking of holdover, it used to be that if you got your book on a major, national network show or other major, you could move a lot of books. You can move a lot of books depending on the situation. I can think of a radio show that used to move 20,000 books. If it was the right segment about the right book with the right audience, they could move books. It was a big deal. But nowadays, there's just too much choice. People call it noise. I call it choice. I think that, who listens to radio the way that they used to? There's Spotify. There's streaming music. There's satellite radio. There's podcasts and audiobooks, all competing for our audio attention. And so, and then just think about cable TV. Who's watching the major network shows, the morning shows these days? I think those are still juggernauts and still very popular, but it just doesn't mean the same thing. Stand in a room of 100 people under 30 and ask them, who of you actually has a cable connection and gets network broadcasts? You'll see very few hands go up.
If any, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we've grappled with that change yet.
No, in so many ways, the owners of those cable companies haven't certainly grappled with, whatever the new revenue model is going to be. But this kind of leads us to something else that's happening that you and I have talked about a couple of times, which is, I want to talk about behind the scenes and managing the Amazon interface, but I'll get to that in a minute. There is more opportunity, I think, and more choice for the author in terms of how they want to proceed to get their book to market. They can self-publish, they can work with a hybrid publisher, they can try to get a deal with a traditional publisher, and really those options didn't exist, at least in the way that they do now, and for the last number of years. But what's happening is that the traditional publishers are, by necessity, and I would argue that it's the economic necessity, they are choosing to work more and more exclusively with the bestseller types, the big name authors, and they're no longer either at all or as much developing those new authors and the mid-list authors, which raises the question, what is happening with those new authors, and where does the responsibility fall for the development of those voices?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think with some different parts to it, but I think one of the ways of understanding what's happened lately is, again, getting back to the digital revolution. We've had is sort of a winnowing of channels. There aren't as many channels through which you can distribute books, and that helps you get the word out about books. So not as many bookstores, for example, but where books are still sold in hard copy are very limited. You've got Barnes and Noble is probably the biggest chain. I think it's still over 700 stores, but they're not necessarily, they're always reinventing themselves, and they just have gone through that again in the last year or so. And they're certainly having to do it now during the pandemic. And a lot of talk, a lot of excitement still around what I think people in the business call the mass market channel, or the big box stores like Target and Walmart, the Costco and so on. But those, I mean, picture the book section at a Walmart. It's so small compared to a normal bookstore, and yet that's where a lot of book business happens. and let's just go pick one topic in or one category or an interest area or genre within Walmart, and say, well, I want to see what kind of books they have about cooking. Well, cooking's probably pretty popular, but still there's going to be only so much space for those books. So that's put a lot of pressure on publishers to be hit driven more than ever. They're only looking for the cream of the crop, the books that are going to sell the best. And I think that's part of, a bigger picture of publishers buying each other and consolidation, and smaller publishers lists kind of going out of, fading away. And I think that's just kind of the way of commerce in the United States. Let me see if I can sort of navigate through this question a little bit more. I would say that what I've experienced is that actually, as much as that sounds like bad news, there actually is a great opportunity there. If the big houses are only going for books that are going to make so much money for them in a year, and they're just ignoring everybody else, I mean, they're ignoring books that are going to sell 5, 10, 15,000 units.
Right.
So if you're an author with that kind of potential, you have an opportunity to strike out on your own, and perhaps even have more control, better revenue stream from the book, and I think that's where the challenge is. Now, some people might say, well, okay, now you're just joining a whole big crowd of people who are all trying to vie for attention and get attention. And there's a lot of noise out there. I'm not a big fan of that argument, the saying that there's a lot of noise. I'd say that there's a lot of choice. And if you can find your audience and really dial into that audience, you're doing something that those big publishers who are putting books in Walmart aren't doing. I'm someone, I'll just use an analogy from the music business. I'm an Americana, or they used to call it alt country kind of fan. I love Lucinda Williams and John Prine, and
yay, John Prine.
I never used to know about that music. I used to be a guy who listened to classic rock radio stations, and if I could find like an alternative rock radio station, I'd listen to that. But so it's the same stuff over and over and over again, and it's the same stuff a lot of other people are listening to. But I've got a little bit of a roots history to my family, and a little bit of a Southern history, and I'd love to. And I just got tuned into some of this Americana music when the whole digital revolution happened and Napster came along, and I know, say what you will, for better or for worse about it, Napster actually helped people discover things. It was very, very disruptive at the time that it was going on. And now I've got like these playlists on Spotify where I'm loving this music. I'm so dialed into some of these artists. In fact, I am a Patreon sponsor for 2 artists that I just really love, and they're local artists here in West Michigan where I live. And so if you think of yourself as a book author trying to reach that highly engaged reader who's just going to love your content, that's not something the bigger publishers are going to be good at as much as they used to be.
That is very, very good insight, and can lead to some good advice. So I was furiously making my notes here as you started talking about the answer to that very long-winded question, which is, how does an author know? What are the things that they need to
You froze up, and maybe I'm going live. How does an author know? I'm sure you'll come back in just a minute, and maybe I should just keep going. Let me just sort of anticipate your question there. How does an author know? Maybe it was about how to get connected to their audience. I think that's a really good question. I myself am trying to sort of develop my own voice as an author. I have a PhD in religious studies, and I've kind of always kept it sort of in the background as I've been working through the publishing business and raising a family and developing a career. But you know, I know that there are, you know, that the experience that I have, what I want to write about is something I think that a lot of people share, but not everybody. And so I think that it just takes time to start working on your craft, work on your concept, start, you know, just getting the words down on paper, start building a website, start figuring out how do you describe yourself. I'm working on my own bio right now, and it's gone through various iterations, and I'm still not happy with it, but it's still, every time I work on it, it keeps getting further and further. So I think it's a question of, you know, it's like I have a psychology background, so it's a question of identity, and identity is sometimes defined as knowing who you are, and then the people who know you know who you are, and how do you get those two things to meet. So I think it's a question of knowing who you are, putting yourself out there. Bonnie, I was you stalled there for a little bit, so I've just been kind of anticipating your question.
Excellent. Well, because I lost my internet connection, so I didn't mention at the you and I know I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I'm in Mexico, and our internet can be, you know, it's wonderful in Mexico. The weather is fantastic, the view is fantastic, and the internet not so much. So I totally lost and had to reconnect. What I don't know is whether the folks watching this either on Facebook or YouTube lost the entire signal, so they might have lost you as well. May
Okay.
I ask you to, let's go back, because this is such an important question. Thank you for playing along and keeping talking,
No
in
problem.
case people were able to hearing you. But so how does an author know, and how do they get themselves into that sweet spot of thinking that they can target to the right audience group? And we talk about that language at Ingenium Books as identifying your reader, singular, but be in that place where they're able to move 10,000, 15,000 units.
Sure. Probably a lot of it too is I was just talking about learning about who you are, and sort of experimenting with describing yourself and putting yourself out there, whether it's through articles and or speaking. And you know, your audience, when you find people gravitating to you, they will help you define who you are. And I think as authors, as writers, it's very easy to sort of be an introvert, and a lot of them are introverts, and you can stay sort of within your own little space. But the more you can get yourself out there, the more you'll discover how people are responding to you and how they describe you, and then you can build on that and fine tune it. I had another thought that went out of my head.
And I'm just going to interrupt you there because, good. Maybe it'll come back. So Yvonne Caputo, who is one of the Ingenium Books authors, she said that she only lost me. So
Okay.
it was just me that lost into the ether. So the value in your answer was sent out to the masses. So Yvonne, who's watching, is, first of all, she commented earlier that she knows Guideposts very well. That magazine was circulated through the retirement community. That was her workplace at the time. And
Sure.
Yvonne is the author of Flying with Dad, a memoir about her relationship with her father and his history and experience flying B-24 bombers in World War II. But Yvonne is one of those authors, like many other indie authors, who are working very, very hard and diligently about trying to reach the reader and to make sure that people know that there is a choice, and that the choice can be to look at her book. So what would you say would be, the most important thing? Some people say the most important thing is the content needs to be good. Some people say, well, it doesn't matter what the content is like. It doesn't matter if it's a good book inside, it needs to have a great cover. And then there's the copywriting. So, and there's so many moving parts. You were in an entire organization that was built around all of the components of getting a book to market. Now we're talking about a single author, never having done it before in many cases, trying to go through those steps where there are normally or have been traditionally big teams. So is that a too long-winded question for you to get in at what do you think is the most important place to start?
Sure. I think that this is one of the things that was occurring to me earlier too. It's also just a question of continuous self-education about your category. So if if your book is a certain kind of book, then make sure that you've done some pretty good research on the other kinds of books that are just like it, that are out there.
Yeah.
A good place to start would be to go into a physical bookstore. They have a way of aggregating books together that you don't necessarily see when you're online. I've always been frustrated when I try to go online and learn about what's going on in a category, and Amazon just doesn't do the trick for me. It just doesn't aggregate things as well. It's also not known as a great place for discovery of books, by the way. That's one of the sad things about not having bookstores. Right. Or maybe as many libraries as we used to, or people in libraries. But I think that's a lot of it. Definitely then, go and, the internet's definitely very helpful still, though. I mean, it's extremely helpful if you then look at that author online. What are they saying about themselves online? Who are they reaching? Who are their, like if they're on social media, look and see who's following them. And now you're starting to get an idea of who their audience is. A little trick that we do in publishing when we're looking for new authors is we go and we look up authors that are exciting to us, that maybe we've already acquired or we just like them, and we look and see who they're following, because sometimes they're following an interesting influencer. Right. Who hasn't actually yet published. So I think don't just look at who is following someone else, but look at who they are following and see what you learn. It's a lot of hit or miss. But I think if you dedicate yourself to just continuing to explore it, after a while, you'll build up on a fund of knowledge of, these are sort of the ropes of my area. This is sort of how people talk about these books, and then go look at your jacket copy on your book. Is the description on Amazon right? What does it look like on your website? Go back and tweak that some more. Look at how those other authors are positioning themselves, we call it, like what kind of messages are they saying on their socials, and say, how would I do that? And how could I package some content that can help, grow awareness of my book and grow an audience around the content that I've offered. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and that whole interface with Amazon, yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. The positioning and how the potential buyer views, accesses, responds to a book, all the technical parts of figuring out what categories and what keywords, all of that stuff is a big chunk. And it represents a healthy learning curve for any indie author. How many people did you have when you were at Zondervan, just working on the Amazon interface?
Well, I probably should be careful about saying too much about real specifics on a show like this, but I would say that there was a team of people, and they were deeply invested in what they were doing. There were custom analytical tools that were being built, so that tells you the sort of depth of the team that was there, helping us analyze, how strong an author's book page is on Amazon, and giving us clues as to what we might work on to try to up the product purchases on that when people come to that book page. And just a lot of really good data around the online presence of a book, but also there was, from a sales side, people helping us understand the data that we're getting from Amazon, the sales data, just there was just a lot. I don't even know if I knew all that was going on, but I knew it was like, wow, there's just so much
Yeah,
in-depth study. I think sometimes the problem can be when there's all that data, it's inside of a company that it's a challenge sometimes to get it to translate well to the publishing teams. And
right.
that's just something that's sort of characteristic of the time that we live in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then one of the other big components, and you and I talked about this offline as well, the challenge of there's a different kind of writing. So it's one kind of writing that you need to apply to develop the book. And that takes a certain skill. And then it's a different kind of writing, copywriting, writing designed to encourage people to take action, which is, buy the book. And often that is a place where the indie author and often the indie publishers like us have a harder time because we've been invested, sometimes for decades in a different kind of writing expertise and that depth. So, what's your recommendation there? Is that something that authors should be looking to develop? Is embracing the copywriting, marketing writing, sales writing component for their jacket copy and descriptions, or is there some other trick?
Yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, I think maybe because of the way that the industry is, every author should try to become a generalist and learn as many disciplines about publishing as they can. It's funny. I worked with one author. He was with our publishing house for quite a long time, and he said, I never really realized. It took me a long time to realize that the publisher can't do everything for you.
Right.
And so he realized that even as successful as he is, he had to keep working. He had to keep working at it. And that's another thing too, I might say. I mean, being an author is something that you've got to take seriously. If you've got big goals, if you've got high expectations, and obviously you can measure your expectations and only invest as much as you really need to, commensurate with those expectations. But let's say you've got high aspirations. Well, let's say you hit them. Let's say you sell 500,000 copies of a book. Well, do you know how much work that is for an author once they hit that level? There are high expectations from the publisher, especially if they're getting big advances. There's high expectations from the readership, and boy, that's pressure to write another book.
Right.
A lot of authors kind of will get cagey about that. They'll hit a wall. So I think all that to say that I think that educating yourself as much, like copywriting, for example, it really shouldn't be that different than how you structure your book in a way. It should have a problem that you're trying to solve, an answer, or a thesis on how you're planning to solve it, the supporting information for that, and hopefully you make it very informative. And I'm obviously thinking more nonfiction here. And then a
Right.
very strong feeling-oriented benefit, a takeaway. And it can't just be intellectual. It's got to be, how's this impacting me? How's this making me feel? Hopefully it's making me feel inspired. It's making me feel better. And it's making me, reading can be a very personal process. You might say it's narcissistic or selfish, but when you're asking someone to spend 25 bucks on a book that you wrote, it's a very personal process. But I think that it's very important to just be a well-rounded, writer / marketer / business person when it comes to being an author.
You touched on something that is often, at least in my experience, often misunderstood by authors in as they pursue the perceived holy grail of a traditional publishing contract, which is that they won't have to do anything or much when it comes to doing the work of marketing the book. What's your experience with that? How active do authors
Sure.
need to be, even if they're in a traditional publishing relationship?
Yeah, even in a traditional publishing relationship, you'll hear authors say, that writing the book and getting that manuscript done was like giving birth. But then when it came to actually launching the book, it was like having to do it all over again. It was just as hard, and they had no idea how hard it would be. I mean, even for an author who's well known and everybody's clamoring for their attention, to sort of schedule all those podcast interviews and really work your own platform. And it's changed. It's changed. I can think of an author that that a lot of us publishers were vying for, and the price of the advance was going up and up and up. And at one point, we just bailed because we said this author is just not willing to do the work for this kind of an advance.
Right.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I think I got a little bit off your question, but I think that
I think so. Which is that, yeah, you have to be ready to roll up your sleeves.
Yeah.
Regardless of which way.
Yeah. But that's that's all because your book is part of your message. It's part of who you are. You want what you're doing to be more than just your book, is what you're trying to communicate. And I think that's that if you can see a more holistic approach to what you're doing, then it really is going to be worthwhile no matter what.
Right. Just as we get ready to wrap up, would you have, what your top 1, 2, or 3 takeaways, biggest pieces of advice from your experience on what indie authors should be doing today? And you probably touched on some of those things already.
Certainly, just keep building your platform, and find the right group for you. Find some really good resources that you enjoy digging into. From just a purely marketing standpoint, you might look at Seth Godin's "This Is Marketing," but that's more just a general, like, how to tell good stories about your product and be empathetic in what you're doing and solve problem solving. In the more faith space, although this book isn't specifically faith, is Mike Hyatt's book called Platform. It's actually been out for a while, but it's still very good on all the fundamentals. And then I think just do some research and find a good site, a good blogger who talks about social media and website promotion and email list, marketing, and just continue to learn. Just keep coming back at it and learn things. And it's consistency over time that really seems to pay off in the world that we're in right now. And that's a good thing. You can use that to your advantage as long as there's consistency and you keep at it.
Yeah, that's right. David, this has been very informative and interesting, and even a little embarrassing with my internet connection and disappearing from
it's the time we're in.
Live show, but exactly, stuff happens. That's right. So thank you so much for your time, and maybe one day we'll bring you back. Who knows?
Sounds good. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Take care, Yvonne.
Okay,
thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.